Welcome everyone to Tech Canada's Deeper Insights webinar series. We have started out the month of February and we have a couple of heavy hitters with us today. I would like to remind everyone to please put your questions and your comments into the question box as we go through. We want to engage with our speakers as much as possible. We'll have the opportunity to break a few times during this presentation so that you can have your questions answered. Today, my guest is Adam Hartung. As I look through his bio, it is a thick and meaty one. He is someone for the last 2 decades has accurately forecasted about market shifting trends. His predictions for industry-leading corporations have made him a frequent press interviewer, and he has spoken on many large companies such as Apple, Microsoft, HP, and other tech industries. As well, he is very knowledgeable in both the automobile, media, and retail industries. So we have invited him here today to talk about his insights, some of his predictions, and some of his trending data. Adam now leads his own company called Spark Partners, and I'm sure he's going to share that information with you afterwards so that if you do want to connect with Adam following the presentation, I invite you to do so. So Adam has also brought a guest with him today, Mary Lou McNally, and Adam, I'll get you to introduce Mary Lou.
Sure. So let me step back just a minute and talk a little bit about how we came to this. My background was as a strategist, and particularly working with people during periods of disruptions. So whether it would be a disruptive technology, a change in the marketplace, or even something like a pandemic, developing strategies around how to be successful during disruptions has been my career. And it was about, I did this for a long time, but I noticed there was 2 pieces. One was developing the strategy, and then the second one was activation. And at about 10, 15 years ago, it was pretty clear to me that my clients were having a lot of trouble with the activation side. And I, went in and talked to a lot of them, and we looked at a lot of the change management products, and they just didn't work a lot of the times. And there was no really good tools to predict whether or not somebody's strategy was going to activate, whether they would be able to get it into the marketplace. So we stepped back and started saying, let's take a look at the process of activation the same way we look at the process of strategy development. And through that, we came up with a number of insights. And so about 10 years ago, I connected up with Mary Lou. And so Mary Lou had been the head of communications for Abbott Pharmaceuticals, and she'd been the head of communications for a notable healthcare company, a healthcare equipment company named Hill-Rom. You might have heard of both of those. And I enticed her to move away from the wonderfulness of corporate life to set up her own company, which she did, called Content Laboratory. And what Mary Lou and I have worked on together, and what you're going to see today is a lot of work that we've done, and a lot, especially on her side when it comes to the implementation. How do we get people to actually do things, right? And what we learned was that the word that came up a lot was reputation. And I say that because reputation is tied to credibility. And everybody has some credibility, but your reputation is a narrower definition of your credibility. And we learned that your reputation and your reputation brand has an awful lot to do with your ability to implement projects. And so that's what we're going to move on today. And so that's Mary Lou over there. And so Mary Lou works with me on a regular basis. Her company, again, is Content Laboratory. And you can contact both of us after this meeting. There'll be contact information in the deck. So we're going to break this into 3 pieces today, all right? And you can see that on the first slide. We're going to go through the first slides here, the first 6 are going to talk about the importance of reputation to your business and how your reputation is determined, because we learned some very interesting things that people don't really know how their reputation is determined, and their assumptions are frequently wrong. We'll stop then for questions, clarifications, comments. Then we'll move on to 3 more slides, which will be around defining communications and their role in credibility, building trust, and managing your reputation. We'll stop again at that point, 15 minutes, and we'll have some more questions, clarifications, and comments. And then we'll finish it up by talking about how you would create and manage your reputation bank. Okay, so we're going to give you an analogy of a bank about how you put things in, take things out, and you would manage your reputation. And then that will conclude, and we'll again go through a 3rd session then of questions and comments. So everybody, you're going to have 3 chances here to jump in and ask us some questions, and I hope that you'll do that for us. And with that, I want to move right into talking about, okay, hang on. Our reputation. Mary Lou, why don't you tell people what we mean when we say reputation?
Sure. Well, I worked in brands and culture for knocking up on 30 years. And the other day I had a client who was at a VP level who said, "Can't you just give me a list of all the things we should say and shouldn't say?" That's not what this is about. Reputation is very much just like any of us. As people, we have personalities. There's traits and characteristics of that, but we also have character or lack thereof, and that's usually where we get into problems with company reputations. But we also bring to the equation some abilities. All of this can also be applied to our reputation. And it's on display really every day as people and as companies. It really is the sum total of everything you say and everything you do and your interactions in those crucial relationships. So much of what we're going to be giving you today isn't that list that client wanted of what do I say, what do I do? It's not about that. It's about sort of that internal compass that we have as human beings that guides what we say to people and how we relate to them. And so you're going to hear a lot, and Adam's going to go into this on our next slide. Reputation and relationships really have a symbiotic connection. And that's something that we really are going to talk about a lot in this part one. All of what you bring to that relationship goes into your reputation. That's how you're perceived.
A lot of people think of reputation as a PR thing. And I think what we have to keep in mind is that you don't really get to control the first thing we learned was you don't control your reputation by what you say. And you can't come out and say, this is my reputation. It doesn't work that way. In fact, you have a reputation that precedes you of some type. And you have to think about, well, what caused that to be there? And so you could build a positive reputation by doing things that build credibility, trust, excite, unite, and give people pride. Now, if you do things that create doubt, suspicion, pessimism, division, and cynicism, you're going to have, it's not going to help your reputation. And so as we were looking at this, we said, well, okay, why? And it's because, in fact, you don't get to create your reputation. Your reputation is conferred upon you by your stakeholders. So when you're out there and you're saying, well, I think my reputation is I should be A, the answer to that is, well, only if the stakeholders agree with that. And so the first big insight we had was most people try to think of their reputation from an inside out point of view. Like I get to say what my reputation is. And the actual truth is it comes from the outside in. And you have to say, all right, my employees, my vendors, my investors, my bankers, the community in which I conduct my business, all of these entities, these stakeholders, what do they think my reputation is? And when I've done things, has that built a positive reputation or has it hurt my reputation, right? So that was one of the big things is that you've got to understand what your reputation is and what the impact is on your business. So Mary Lou, why don't you talk a bit about the stakeholders?
A lot of planning starts, as Adam said, from the inside out. And again, if we go back and think about our reputation as a person, and I think that's a very useful way to do it. In fact, there are large companies that I've worked with over the years, like Procter & Gamble, that really dive deep into this. It is the first step in almost any planning for their billion-dollar brands. Because if you think about reputation as a person, what if a person always started from I, me, they go into that relationship that way? That's when you get people, they kind of want to repel from you. It's because it's a little repugnant, right? So reputation building really has to start with who these stakeholders are. And that's not only just customers. I think, as business people, we're really comfortable thinking about our target audiences and our most important customer stakeholder. But gosh, regulators can be stakeholders, and they follow this same process. If you go into them with I, you're probably going to have a bad relationship, specifically with regulators. And you can take this process just like you would when you have a really healthy relationship with another human being. Reputation's the same way, and a relationship with our stakeholders, it follows the same course. We all have these three things that we bring into a relationship and that we have to relate to in a relationship from the other person. And the first one is identity. But these all get to parts of the decision model, and that's what you're gonna see. There's a decision tree that we all kind of go through, whether we're looking at corporate brand or product brand. These relate very specifically to those things, and you'll see through this process, how we get to that, and at a deeper level than probably we're used to. Identity is that distinctiveness, and it's not just what differentiates us as a human being or a group of human beings. It also gets down to what do we believe in and what do we stand for. And those tend to be pretty critical. When you're talking about culture, which is your internal reputation or your internal brand, this is really powerful. This gets into values and those things that create the framework so we can operate properly and successfully. But again, think about identity as really being related to what inspires people in those relationships with you. When we get to the second thing, that's around ambition. And again, we all have them. They could be, huge dreams and aspirations, or they can be little small things. And it depends on that identity and sense of self. But your reputation also is going to have to touch on this, because this is what motivates people. And again, it can be what we see as a very sterile regulator group, but they still have some level of ambition, right? And so this is what drives us. And then role is super crucial, and it's something that I think people forget when they think about reputation building or brand building. There has to be a role in a relationship, and that has to be something that it really is a fit, because we're going to gravitate to that as human beings. We're going to gravitate to those relationships where we feel like we fit in. We talk a lot about that as culture, but it's very specific to this, and it's not about a job description internally. How do I fit into this world, but fit together with the other people in that particular ecosystem? If it's a workplace, out in the world, if it's a buying environment. But if you even go into a customer relationship with the role of, we sell it, you buy it. That's as far as it goes. That's what we're calling transactional relationships. Those aren't transformational. They're not going to get you to big, beautiful reputation. They're very one-off, very matter of fact. They're not particularly long-lasting. I'll say that those are the transactional relationships are like really shallow dating, right? When you get to something that's transformational, we're going to talk about this a lot going forward. Those are like, now we're kind of moved in together and we're going to get married, and those are very different relationship dynamics. You kind of probably, for most of your stakeholders, you want to get a lot closer to the marriage than the more shallow relationships. So all of this goes into it, and it's as Adam said, really thinking about the stakeholder first, then connecting that back to who you are. And we have a process and a way to do that. And it is the most important starting point of building a reputation.
And again, this is really important, folks, because one of the things we learned was that most people think of their communications transactionally. They don't think about the ability for it to be transformational. They really think of it as transactional. And you're not going to move people with transactional communications alone. So why is this important to our business, Mary Lou?
Really in a ton of ways. In the real world, we like to think this, but money can't buy you these relationships. We think we're giving an employee a paycheck. That's a transaction, okay? That's not going to get you to loyalty and retention and that kind of almost crusader-like contribution to your growth goals. That doesn't happen just because of a paycheck. That's why culture is rapidly over the last a couple of decades becoming a really important part of managing a high-performing team. But it's true of external relationships. You know, what money buys you are communication tactics. That is not necessarily the basis of reputation building. Relationships and your reputation, what buys that is trust and credibility. And that's how you go about doing those communications and interacting in those relationships. What we do know, there's been a lot of study and we can go through all that, but financial performance and reputation have a direct correlation. That's been shown over and over and over again. But it's interesting because it's not just that reputation can drive you to be more successful financially and drive financial performance numbers. Actually, financial performance can drive your reputation, which is interesting because we don't think about that. I think sometimes we're actually a little shy about, hey, we're highly profitable, right? We don't want to say that. We think that turns people off. We think it looks greedy. That's not the case. Financial performance can absolutely drive your reputation, but as long as you don't break the public success rules. They love a success story. The public really, really does. But they have rules for that. And we call them, that's kind of our little phrase for this, we call them the success rules. You can be profitable, you can't be greedy. You know, you can be operationally excellent, but you can't be destructive in that process. You have to show that you're a good citizen. They want you to innovate. They don't want you to just ride somebody else's coattails. You have to be truthful. You can't, kind of dance around the truth. And again, as the public sees it. You have to share and you have to stand up for what's right. We've seen a fair amount of that down in the US right now. There are a lot of companies acting as bystanders, and they're getting spanked for it by the public. It's not appealing. And again, if you think about your reputation as a person, nobody really, at the end of the day, likes that person. So all of these things are important because Adam's going to talk about the next thing. You get permission. You have to have permission to be involved in your stakeholders' lives. That's a big part of reputation, and it's a big part of the reason that reputations fail.
So I want to put you on the spot, Mary Lou. I want you to compare Apple and Facebook.
What I would say is that I don't know that I can make that comparison because they're, apples and oranges a little bit. What I would say is, the failure, I think, of Facebook, certainly over the last year, but this has been building for a while. I would think of them on that last bullet point. And again, certainly here in the U.S., everybody's clear on all of our struggles, Black Lives Matters, all of it, the whole thing. Facebook's been a bystander. They have not been what the media is and has traditionally been. They took that role. They were innovative. That was great, but they were destructive because they in essence, it has been again viewed down here in the U.S. That they took that role of the media and then didn't manage that valuable thing properly, and they were a bystander, and it's caused damage. So not a comparison, but that's the way I feel about it. Yeah.
Well, one of the things, as a strategist, when I look at these kinds of issues, I notice that, for example, Apple is at all-time highs on its stock, right? It's doing really well. But Facebook, it peaked over a year ago. And these issues you're talking about has really caused a change in their reputation. And we see that now in terms of the difficulties they're having with customers, difficulties they're having with their stock price, difficulties they're having with the regulators. And you sit there and say, wow, what's the difference? Well, if we go back to those earlier slides and what we were talking about, how did you build your reputation? What were you doing? And once you were successful, did you operate by the success rules, right? And
nobody minded Mark Zuckerberg being a multi-billionaire until he broke almost every one of these rules.
Well said. Well said.
Now you've got boycotts.
So what do credibility and trust and reputation buy you? And this is the point that I wanted to really start to understand, and I try to help everybody out there in the audience understand, which is that if you have trust and credibility when you're ready to go implement change, that's going to determine your success. If you say, well, I've got a great strategy, or I'm a brand new CEO, or I've got a new insight, and I want, let me come and share my insight with you, or let me tell you something, and you think people are going to like, oh, let's see the strategy, let's look at the deck, let's go act. It doesn't work that way. If you don't have that credibility and trust, if you don't have that reputation, they're going to drag their heels. We worked recently with an electric utility that was offshore. It wasn't a United States electric utility. And their strategy group was just phenomenal. I worked with around utilities for over 20 years, and I was just really surprised at the quality of the strategic work they'd done. And they knew they had to make some big changes. And they were all ready to do this and ready to move forward. But the problem was that internally, people didn't have trust with their senior leadership team.
And externally.
Yeah, and you're right, exactly. The regulators had problems with the senior leadership team. Customers had problems with the senior leader. The history of the utility meant that when they got ready to go take action, they didn't have the admission ticket to get these people behind them, right? They weren't really in, they had the right idea, but their reputation was just not in a position to let them be successful. So with this kind of section here that, we've kind of talked about trying to rethink a little bit how you build your reputation, how it comes from the outside in, how important it is to your business, how we tend to think transactionally rather than thinking about in a long-term sense. I'd like to open it up now. And Ruth Ann, do we have any questions from anyone? Any comments, anything people like to dig deeper into?
While I'm waiting for people to dive into this, Adam and Mary Lou, one of the things that I believe I hear you saying is that stakeholders want to see themselves reflected in the company that they are supporting. Is that accurate?
100%. Sorry, Adam, I'll answer for you. It gets back to that identity ambition role. They absolutely want to see themselves, but also their value structure reflected in what you're doing. They want to see that you care enough about, we're going to talk a lot about communications, making a generous contribution. It's all about the contributions to the relationship, and that energy provider that Adam was talking about missed the boat on almost every turn and every stakeholder audience, and letting those stakeholders see those values and that sense of self reflected in the company's words and actions. And the company never, in all of that work, really even asked for permission. Their permission was, we give energy, you pay our rates. And that's not an admission ticket into people's lives. That's not how you gain all of the benefits of those relationships. And again, it's something money can't buy, nor just power loading people with your communications. It doesn't do it.
So this leads to the next question. Yeah, but this leads to the next question that Jim's brought up, and something I was thinking about too, is that diagnostically, how do companies assess their reputations? And Jim is asking without bias. So how do you get that mirror image before you begin some of this? Where does your work begin?
It's as simple as the conversations. And a lot of people can, and a lot of companies can invest a lot of money in market research. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but they miss the value of sitting down and having very real conversations with key stakeholders about who they are and what's important to them. When you do it through market research, you're going to get the numbers, you're going to get the quant back that you probably are thirsting for. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in metrics next. You can get to those numbers, and you can prove almost at any point you want to with those numbers, and that's why I'm saying you have to have those conversations, and let's be a little careful about bias, because sometimes bias can be, the concern about bias can be used because we have our own biases going into that process. When we have all been there, market research can be adjusted in any number of ways based on trying to eliminate bias. But I would not discount those very real conversations I mean, you can do those in groups, you can do those on one-on-ones. There's any number of ways, and we don't have to make it harder than it is. What it really comes down to is the act of truly listening. And there's a process to do that. And like I said, it doesn't have to be harder than any other conversations we have in life. But it has to be based on this sort of formula of how stakeholders relationships work. And I think that's kind of what we're laying out here. So you can do it in two different ways. You can do a quant qual on research going in on all your stakeholder audiences. I'm certainly not saying not to do that. But within that process, make sure you're having very transparent, very healthy relationship conversations that focus on them and what they're looking for. You bring your overlay on what you want and what you're looking for in after that.
Okay. All right,
Super.
Ruth Ann,
I'll let you, yeah, we've got one more question, but I think we can leave it maybe. Okay, so Sylvain's question was, in regards to your key stakeholders, how do you determine who should get greater attention? Should you treat all stakeholders equally, private customers versus your larger investors? So maybe you're going to touch on that later, but we'll leave this as the last question for this section.
Adam, would you like me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Adam and I have written a workbook, and you will see very much attention to detail in this and multiple worksheets that get into exactly this question. That's always going to be subjective based on what you want to achieve. Okay, so I'm going to start with that, the caveat. However, our process on the way to do that is, you identify 6 sort of stakeholder groups that you think are really important to your business, and you give them an influence index. We have sort of a way of you can sort of organize this and score this a little bit, not so again specifically, but there's a way to think about your stakeholders in terms of that influence they have over your business. And I put them kind of into 3 categories. There's action or control. They may buy something from you, or they have some control over you like a regulator. Okay, so that's what action and control is. And if you think about it as an upside down, triangular pyramid, it's the big base part of this because it's pretty important. Then in the middle is advocacy. And at the bottom is opinion, and that starts to relate to a decision model, okay, for things you need from these stakeholders, because the action control gets into motivating and doing something. Small end of the triangle, you're talking about opinion, that gets into awareness types of things where you merely need to inform them, right? And so you prioritize your stakeholders based on that. I'm not going to say you absolutely prioritize them. There may be situations in which they're all equal, but we have a way of using that index in case you would like to prioritize them. I hope that answers.
And one of the things that's important is one of the reasons we bring up the 6 is because oftentimes if you want to communicate to one group, you can hurt your reputation with another group. And what we try to do is say, are you looking at all the stakeholders when you communicate? When you talk to your investors, are you thinking about your employees? That kind of a thing. That builds
and we have
out.
A way of categorizing, and this is a perfect transition. We have a way of categorizing how you should be doing communications based on that sort of influence index. It all sort of leads up to how you execute. So that's the way our process works. And again, this is sort of the basis of it. Are you doing communications and interactions, whether those are written, verbal, at events, whatever it may be? Are those sort of transactional interactions and communications, or are those transformational? Right now, I mean, the dial is turned up to max volume right now. There is so much going on out there. I mean, I think we're all just sort of flooded with this noise and these voices. And a lot of the times that's how we measure things. It's why I want people to just a little back off this idea of quantifying everything, because I can guarantee you when you go through our process, Transactional communications, if you assign like a score or a value to them, which is what our process does, you're going to need way more of those to make a reputational impact with your stakeholders than what we call those transformational communications. Then they're less one-off. They're related to something that really matters to your stakeholders. You are making that generous contribution to the relationship. And that's the way communication should be viewed. You know, if it's just cotton candy, you've done nothing. If it's just about your features and benefits, you've probably not moved the needle tremendously with your stakeholder group. But if you're feeding them really healthy, insightful, and generously contributing communications, you're going to start building that relationship faster and better. What I am trying to communicate is with all this noise out there, it's like the lines and the columns on an Excel spreadsheet, on a spreadsheet. They all add up. Every social post, everything adds up. And that is true, both the positive and the negative. And we have to be really careful. That's why we have to think about our balance sheet or our bank account, right, with reputation. And this is what I'm talking about. This is the difference between a little bit of cotton candy and, you know, the really healthy kale salad of interactions and communications. Your communications that feed reputation should be powered by something. I'm not saying transactional communications don't have a role. That's insane. Of course they do. But if you're just doing press releases about your product or your company and they're largely features and benefits or a moment in time news announcement, we have to understand that's not powered for a long-term relationship. That's powered for just like cash would be in a transaction. It's, you know, sort of here and then it goes and you go on to the next thing. And so you have to put your communications that are feeding your reputation, and again, that bottom line number of your reputation, you have to feed that with things that are powered to do certain things. And so, just to review, we all know this. There's a decision model and there's primary outcomes of communications. You know, inform is a pure awareness goal. If you're going to do social media stuff, you know, this is just pure impressions and views, right? And so as you start to move down the line of the purpose behind what you're doing, it starts to have a little more power behind it, a little more action behind it. Educate. Now you're starting to change thinking. It's not just that something exists, an awareness that something exists. Now you're starting to kind of change the way people are thinking. You get and take that further, and we should take that further. You know, that inspiration. Now you're starting to get into the stuff that's not just head, it's the heart stuff. And that's when you start really motoring with how you're engaging folks. The inspirational stuff cannot be discounted. That should translate into getting people to really be fans, okay? And advocacy is when now you start to get them. That's when you got a loyal and really high performing employees. The ones, you know, you kind of get to the inspiration and the advocacy part. Ultimately, all this leads to them to doing something. And it's not just the customers buying, it's employees, you know, amping up, you know, what we're doing toward growth. It's regulators being kind of a fan of what you're doing. And so there's a process we all know. You can relate it to a marketing funnel too, but it's really a decision model. How am I going to become your biggest fan? And that's the process we go through. Communications have to be powered to do that. That comes from insights. That's the generous contribution that
you know, at a superficial level, Mary Lou, when you talk about this, it makes me think about some advertising I saw on television over the Christmas holidays. And there was a car company, Cadillac, they're running ads and they're saying, oh, look how beautiful our car is. Look at the interior, look at the warmth. And they kept talking about, you know, the features of the car. And then over on the other side, there was this ad that was being run by Subaru. And it starts off with a family, and then it shows them they're going to have a baby, and and then it shows them putting like tennis balls on the corner of the tables and all this kind of stuff. You go through like 45, 50 seconds.
Dog.
Running
Always
around.
dog. Subaru
Yeah,
commercial.
yeah, dog. Yeah, don't forget the dog. And then at the very end, the last few seconds, they show them get in a car, and then they try to drive, and there's an emergency system kicks in, and they don't have an accident. We
Okay,
know, yeah,
Gotcha.
and Subaru has the very highest rebuy rate of all the car companies in the world, higher than Mercedes, Porsche, anybody else. And I think it really drives it. You know, here we had Cadillac informing me and educating me a little bit about their car, wanting a deal. You had
Gotcha.
Yeah, Subaru was actually driving, you know, what's our reputation? What do we stand for? What does that mean to the customer? And I think that's the big part that we want to start to really get across is that the reputation is where your strategy and your strategy and your leadership and your culture all come together, right? It's you see it in your reputation, your strategy, your leadership, and your culture. And you know, you can't just have the strategy. You've got to have these pieces coming together in a real way, and you've got to have your stakeholders on board. And if you've got a great idea for a new product launch or a new place you want to take your company or an improvement in your strategy, what we know now is that you might have to work on your reputation before you can get to that. You know, because are they going to go jump off the cliff with you to do something new if you don't have the right credibility?
Everybody's going through change right now. And whether you want to confess that it's small change or admit that it's really monumental, every human being, I think, on the planet right now is going through a lot of change. And the companies, it's exponentially greater. You're asking people, as leaders, you're asking people to just shift gears. And even if the previous state was kind of lousy, and that happens, right? There's a reason a lot of change programs happen intentionally by companies, and usually because whatever we were doing before it wasn't working, right? It wasn't working for customers or employees or anything. But you have to realize, even though the previous state was lousy, at least it was known and it was comfortable and familiar. And so lousy can be comfortable. Asking people to change is literally like asking them to kind of jump off that cliff into the unknown. When we have leaders without followers, that's how it happens, because we have not embraced what those communities and individual stakeholders need to be able to jump off the ledge, right? Okay, I'm gonna take this step. The only reason they're going to do that is because they trust you.
So Ruth Ann, do we have any questions out there in the audience? Anybody want to talk about these forms of communication and how we build our credibility? Any questions?
Yeah, we sure do. We've got one from Dave, and you know, it really speaks to the fact that people make mistakes. They do a misstep in their company and their reputation goes a little bit sideways. What is the best way to regain that trust? What strategies should they engage?
We may ask you to hold this question, but I'll give you a little preview. I'm sorry, Adam, do you mind?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about how you build your bank and how you make deposits and we'll deal with withdrawals. And he's talking about what happens when you make a withdrawal. So we'll get right to that in the next section. But go ahead with a little recap or highlight.
And very often the bad stuff. So we're going to give you 4 sort of categories of things. There's the cash transactional good stuff you do. There's the investment in much longer, beefier kinds of programs that you do. But then there's the bad stuff that happens. And I think this is what you're talking about. You know, most stuff that happens that's bad and damaging to a reputation is because employees did something that had really good intentions, but it went really sideways. And so I love you know the way you stated that. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about some companies that kind of made these mistakes. And it's going to come down to putting more cash and credibility gold back into your bank account. And hopefully you've been doing that all along so you can prepare to weather the storm, but also so that you did the reputation training to try to prevent those things from happening and protect your reputation well. So we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Another one, Ruth Ann.
That's all that's in the in our question bank right now. So I'm going to let you guys carry on.
Okay, so what we're going to address specifically now, we'll dive deeper into your credibility, how to categorize your commitments, and I keep pushing the wrong button. So we're going to remember that reputation should be managed like a valuable asset. One of the things we tend to make business decisions looking at financial numbers, we often don't take into account what the reputation issues will be. We also tend to make decisions discreetly or one time, and the impact of that decision can affect your reputation over time. And what we're going to recommend here is that you think systematically about, are you building your reputation or are you detracting from your reputation, so that all these one-off decisions don't get made and then forgotten, but rather we track it and we try to make sure we know where we are relative to what's the strength of our reputation balance sheet, okay? So Marilyn, why don't you talk about the good stuff, how we build our reputation in the good way?
Sure. And and again, this theory of almost thinking about your reputation like a bank statement or balance sheet. I'm a little more comfortable with the bank statement part of this. You're going to have to put more stuff in than you take out, and that's where you think about these missteps from these employees. So, two things you can do before something bad happens. One is do a lot of cash deposits, credibility, cash deposits into your reputation. But more importantly, think about those things that you can do programmatically, thinking like Subaru. That wasn't just a press release that they put out or a one-off event. They've been doing Share the Love for decades. And I'm not saying all of these programs have to last that long, so don't worry, because I know those are big investments. But there's things that you do programmatically. They're not just one thing. They're a sum total of many different things all working toward a theme. That's going to be, the gold that we're talking about. But you think about those as longer term investment. Okay, so putting all that good stuff in before something bad happens. And then the second thing you can do before something bad happens is do reputation training throughout your company. And that's, our process fits into that. The workbook fits into that. Training your employees to think about how every decision that they make can affect reputation helps an awful lot before they do that thing like, oh, gee, let's increase the price of our drug 400%. Seems like a good idea because I know we got to beef up earnings and profitability, but oh my gosh, that could have decades and decades and decades of consequences down the road. And so training employees can also prevent the bad stuff from happening. So here, when we're talking about credibility cash, and again, it's just these are transactions. There's nothing wrong with those. But you have to think of them as transactional. They're a little bit here today and probably gone tomorrow. They'll contribute to your reputation, but you need a ton of them. And you just have to realize, they take a little longer to add up than something that's really based in a stakeholder's wants, needs, and that generous contribution again to the world your stakeholders live in. These tend to be a little bit more like me, myself, and I. These are the media relations you do. It's not like you don't have to do that. These are very transactional moment in time things, and those include the press releases and the press events. Financial communications falls into that same bucket. There are employee communications. Your town halls do not a culture make, right? So they're really important employee communications. It's not like you don't have to do an org announcement, but an org announcement and a redesign of your organization does not, again, a culture or an internal reputation make. Those tend to be culture programs where it's about inspiration and values and shared vision, and those are just they're very different, and again they're programmatic. It's not a one-off town hall where you're talking about values, but not necessarily those longer. It's part and parcel of something else, bigger. Same with citizenship and community relations. You may do one-off events, but that is not a citizenship program per se. And you can go down the line. They're all really important, and they are going to contribute to your reputational bottom line, just a little different way. Important to note, these things stop becoming cash and become debts when you break those success rules, right? So even these, as transactional as they are, can be damaging.
One of the things that, in my mind, this adds up to that magic word, transparency. People feel as if you're much more transparent when you make a lot of these deposits. Now let's talk about the big ones. The
Yeah,
gold.
and this is a growth investment. Cash is look, we all know what cash is, but you're not necessarily going to retire on what's in your wallet or in your checking account in the bank. You're going to make investments that build in value over time. Reputation's the same way. We talked a lot about Subaru, but now let's talk about one where it's just tiny. I mean, and I work in biotech quite a bit. These guys are so small. I mean, they only have maybe 20, 30 employees at this point. They are on the leading edge of regenerative medicine. They are doing one of the most interesting areas of this around tissue and literally regrowing organs. But they got a really bad regulatory action. They literally got denied approval for a product that families have been waiting for because their kids are a clock counting down before the family's not a family anymore. And so really big time stakes. They've turned that actually for their company into a positive because they've made such incredible progress on resolving the regulatory issues. And we put them out there as a thought leader. And it turned out that because they were being so generous about what they had experienced through this process of resolving their regulatory issues, they were being generous to other companies. Huge pharma companies that have regenerative medicine arms that can't work through these issues, they're literally being stalked at industry meetings now. The reason that's a good thing for business and very clear on financial performance, they're being stalked by these other pharmaceutical and biotech companies, huge companies, at partnering events. And so their business development is through the roof right now because they've been positioned as a thought leader. And all this we didn't make it about me, myself, and I. It's been a consistent drumbeat program of saying we're going to be really generous to the industry and share our knowledge of what we've learned. And it's worked beautifully. They're just in fantastic position right now. That's what a growth investment in reputation and credibility can do for you. They're well on their way now to going past being a one-trick pony, right? They can actually bring in a valuable asset now because of their thought leadership. So these programs can have enormous value. And that's going to help you build that reputational bottom line faster, better than just these one-off kind of things that we tend to be really comfortable doing. Yes, these can be really high investment programs. This is that real world money that you have to put into tactics. But you have to understand that's small but mighty thought leader that I just talked about. The effect on that started 3 months after we began that process of positioning them as a thought leader. We're now 12 months into it, and they are in beautiful shape. So yes, they require typically a lot of real world money investment. But there are things you can do. And again, if you focus on what is that generous contribution I can make besides me, myself, and I, and then it can happen really quickly and for a lot less money than you would think.
Yeah, I'm always struck at how many people think that just giving the string of transactional communications will sum up to gold, rather than saying, no, that's important to your transparency, but you really have to figure out where you want to be in the future. And just a quick comparison, in the last couple of years, General Electric wanted to move its headquarters, and it did, from Connecticut to Boston. At their own expense, nobody terribly excited about it. And why? Well, because for a decade, GE had been not investing. Here, it had a pot of gold when, in 2010, it was definitely one of the leading companies, but that had evaporated, and now nobody cared. Whereas when Amazon said, hey, we want to go get a new headquarters location, there was all these communities jumping up. People wanted to interact with them, right? And so they had built up their gold. They had invested in their reputation. And so it came to be very helpful when they were ready to expand and come up with another headquarters location.
And it can be also, you can go ahead, Adam. It can
yeah, so now into the other side of this, which we start to talk about the where things don't go quite right for you, right? And so this is credibility debt. We call it debt because when you make one of these mistakes, you have to pay it back with interest. Right? It's kind of like you can make the cash deposits again and again and again, but when you take on the debt, oh, you got to give that back and interest. So it hurts you in a bigger way. And there's really kind of, these are the things often where we just trip over ourselves, and leaders could be a lot more involved in training the organization and helping them out. So, you often have this sort of knee-jerk reaction. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the incident that happened a few years ago where there was a fellow who got on an airplane to fly from A to B on an airline here in the United States. He happened to be a physician, and the plane was oversold, and the airline said, well, we prioritize, getting our flight crews taken care of. So they went on the plane and said, somebody's got to get off because we need to get a member of our crew to this destination. Nobody volunteered. So they eventually came on. They said, well, we're going to pick somebody. And they said, Joe, you got to get off the plane. Joe said, I'm not getting off the plane. I have to go. I need to be at my destination tomorrow. They called a policeman to come in. The policeman dragged the guy off the airplane. It's all shot on video now. It goes viral. This is just kind of like lunacy that had happened. But then on top of that, the company didn't apologize, right? When it happens and it goes viral, the first thing you got to do is you got to start saying, wait a minute, what's this doing to my reputation?
And this is really,
yeah,
really
important.
And the question that was asked, what can you do when a misstep is made to repair your reputation? Right. And like I said, there's preventive things you can do. Which is really important because the distinction on credibility debt for the one that comes after the other negative category, the distinction here is they tend to have a little bit of shorter term impact, except they tend to be repetitive events. The boneheaded thing that somebody did or the thing that was caused upon the company's reputation tends to happen over and over again. Reputation training can help that. But also the thing that you can do, particularly top accountability in the company, is fix the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, and Oscar Munoz did not fix the problem. He made it far worse. Yeah. Okay, and I can give you all the rules on an apology, because too often we see these non-apologies. Oh, I'm so sorry it happened, but he deserved it. The guy was bloodied and dragged off the plane. I mean, really? Yeah. That is not an apology, man. That is just no way to go about fixing the problem. And it ends up being far more expensive, whether you're in litigation. Now you have to give all your loyalty customers like 5,000, 10,000 points so they don't run away from your programs. There's always going to be a real world cost to messing up the initial reaction. And that's one of the first things. But if we could just go back just real quickly, Adam. The second example that's on here, again, is a repetitive problem. And again, it gets into these judgment calls and decisions that are made, and they're made with sort of good intentions. The second one in the red box here is an H&M example. They wanted to be known as edgy. Well, they got way too edgy, and they put like literally a racial slur on a hoodie and put a black model in it in their advertising. As despicable as and reprehensible as that is, because that's not edgy, they've done it before, and the media started picking up the fact that they've done it before and that they've had outright racist comments in response to questions about their diversity and inclusion. And so yeah, you have to try to prevent the employees from doing the really dumb thing. And it seems like a good idea at the time, but it's really not. But then you really have to make sure you're not doing that same dumb thing over and over and over again. And when you're questioned and when the issues arise, that you don't make it worse. So
right.
Go to the next.
Well, and what I wanted to do, the reason I jumped there was because we were talking about what was going on with Munoz. And, for years, that airline, United, had, they'd said, fly the friendly skies, fly the friendly skies, fly the friendly skies. This is where we start talking about credibility, cryptocurrency. You put all this energy and money and everything into that motto, but then do you push that through your organization so that it's effective? Or is it like cryptocurrency and it just blows up on you? And that's what happened there. You know, everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. Well, the United Skyway does not look so friendly anymore, right? And so you just exploded. And just like cryptocurrency, just, you know, the value can go away in a heartbeat. That's just a great example of
But
where,
the value goes away is around that value proposition.
yeah.
If you have a success formula for your company, you have a value proposition, then major companies successful. Cryptocurrency is a little different because it's a bubble that's going to burst at some point, and there's two ways to do it. So, Adam, do you want to cover that, or?
Go ahead, Mary Lou.
The first thing is this detachment from our value proposition. And again, this one can happen repetitively, but generally what's happening here is that it's under the surface. It's off the radar screen. It's bubbling problem waiting to either burst violently, or it just is insidious. It erodes your reputation because now it's eroding your value proposition. And generally this comes again from, you know, employees or others making judgment calls. You know, we need to expand profitability. We need to show better earnings. And the entire employee base has basically been told that. And so they start to detach themselves from the value proposition because they're making what they see as well-intentioned decisions. And there's these could be little or big things. And the example we gave, we're calling it tone deaf. You know, a natural food grocer, you know, is all about healthy living and wellness. Everything they do, it's used through all their communications. Their product lines are all about that. The shelves are stocked with it. That's not the one you think. And you know, they need to increase profitability, and their line operations managers and others start finding ways to do that. Now they're putting moldy bread on the shelves and products that just don't fit with that value proposition at all. And worse, customer service teams now, when they're getting the complaints, are still using brand taglines like, okay, sorry you got the moldy bread, but have a nice day or have a healthy day. And it's like, wait a minute, that's completely counterproductive to what we actually stand for and what we were successful in the first place. So it's that detachment that happens. And the worst is actually when it's bubbling under the surface on those one-on-one interactions with customers, because God knows how many times a customer heard that, right? It doesn't help your brand, doesn't help your reputation. And in fact, it starts really destroying it. The second one, and this is a far more violent, usually, reaction. You know, celebrities and influencers, you know, we sort of defer our credibility and co-opt influence. And we just love all the followers that they have, and you know what, and you just sort of like, yeah, you know, this is great, this is fantastic. Their job description is being famous. You have no idea what they're going to end up doing. You know, and it could be an influencer on social media. This example's actually a compilation. It's not a one, you know, real life example. It's actually a compilation of some. You know, you can't hire that mom influencer that's absolutely amazing. You don't know what she's going to do. You know, she could do something that's completely against your brand and your value structure. As an example, years and years ago, we hired a celebrity for a pharmaceutical product, and you know, they get paid an awful lot of money. She ended up in a huge scandal, you know, cheating with another celebrity, and it was just ugly. And so everything just starts to go south at that point. You're letting somebody take control of your credibility, and you have no idea what they're going to do, and they have not the same skin in the game you do. They have a lot less to lose than you do. So these are some of the cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, and I think it's important that people remember what we're talking about here is the difference between what Subaru did when they created gold by consistently investing in their message, and then operationalizing it through their product and how their dealers interact with customers. And then on the other side of this, we have a situation where, as you said, somebody, instead of building that gold, they put all the money into the influencer, and the influencer makes a mistake, right? Or the other side of it is you put a lot of energy into building up this message, like Chipotle's did, for example, and then you don't operationalize it effectively, and people start getting sick in your restaurants.
And the
So
real issue,
careful you don't create that cryptocurrency.
yeah, and you've sucked all the value out of your reputation. Now
Right.
you have to work really hard and invest to get even back to zero, if you can even do that. Not to mention get it back to where you want to be. There's a multiplier to all this.
So
I'm cognizant of time, you guys, so I would like to sort of see where we can finish off on a good note, because people are going to be dashing off to their businesses soon here.
Great. So I want you to think about this as a reputation bank. You can build your statement, and wanted to let you all know that you can go to thereputationbank.com, where we have a workbook that can help you to go through all of these issues very effectively. It's $50, by the way, $50 US for the workbook. It's not terribly expensive, and we're going to put up a coupon. If you type Tech Canada, you'll get $10 off. So just type Tech Canada into the coupon code, and you'll get it for $40. And it allows you to work through the issues that we've been talking about here. And of course, we'd be happy if any chair in the tech community would like to have us come do a workshop with their group. We do offer this as a tech workshop that we could do with your multi-company environments. So that's kind of wrapping it up for us. Any last minute questions?
No, and I want to thank you both for joining us today and talking about being in, making sure we're putting into the reputation bank. And I just wanted to, one little story is Dave Carroll is a Canadian musician, and he wrote a beautiful song called United Breaks Guitars. So
yes, familiar.
Absolutely.
So,
and
you know
you
what?
would have learned from that experience, wouldn't you?
That's awesome.
He became a star because of it.
Yes.
Right.
And United didn't learn. So let's carry that forward. So this has been recorded and will be available on the Tech Canada website. And again, reach out to Adam and Mary Lou through both their companies here and also as tech speakers. So again, I thank everyone for joining us today, and be healthy out there and watch your reputation.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.